Good morning, everyone, to our panel conversation titled African Borders and Artistic Collaborations for the 2022 Hausa International Book and Arts Festival. I'm very happy to be with an exciting panel this morning and very interesting panelists that I'm going to introduce to you first quickly before we start into our conversations around African borders and artistic collaborations. So I'm here with Valeria Meneghelli. She is the co-founder of Culture Funding Watch and holds a master degree in global creative and cultural industries from London and a master degree in Oriental Studies from Rome. She's also passionate about artistic and cultural production in the Mediterranean region and in particular Tunisia, where she focuses on her research activities on heritage and politics, among other things. Then also here with us today is Ochai Ogaba. He is the winner of the Prince Claus Fund Seeds Award and is a dancer, choreographer, and photographer based in Kaduna State. He's also the founder and creative director of Mud Art Dance Company. And with that company, he's going to perform here in Lagos on Thursday and Saturday this week, which I'm very much looking forward to. He uses dance and photography to tell stories that highlight the history, culture, heritage, and daily lives of the people in northern region of Nigeria. Also here with us today is Madhu Krishnan. She's a professor of African World and Comparative Literatures at the University of Bristol. And she is also the author of Contemporary African Literature in English, Global Locations, Postcolonial Identifications from 2014, and another book called Contingent Canons, African Literature and the Politics of Location, published in 2018. And last but not least, Marie Le Sourd is since 2012 the Secretary General of On the Move, the Cultural Mobility Information Network, which is active in Europe and worldwide. Marie Le Sourd has over the years nurtured a knowledge pool for international cooperation, funding schemes for the mobility of artists and cultural professionals, networks, and web resources. And this is exactly what we are going to speak about today, among other things. And me, myself, I'm Nadine Siegert, and I'm currently the director of the Goethe-Institut Nigeria, and I'm also a publisher with Iwaliwa Books. So our topic for today is borders and collaborations, borders and exchange, which might sound contradictory in the beginning, but this is what we are dealing with in our everyday life, I think, in our professional lives. And the festival proposed a very beautiful quote as the guiding topic for this panel that I would like to read out for you now quickly. It's by Aime Cesaire, an African poet and political theorist, and one of the founders of the Negritude movement. He said, "It is a good thing to place different civilizations in contact with each other, that whatever its own particular genius may be, a civilization that withdraws itself atrophies. That for civilizations, exchange is oxygen." So exchange is oxygen. Sorry, there are a lot of X's in these two words. Is what I would love to start with. Staying with this metaphor of oxygen and breathing, which is such a strong image, especially in our times of COVID or post-COVID, and also the Black Lives Matters movement, where we talked a lot about breathing and breathing together in the last few years. And when we look at this in relation to cultural exchange, when we believe that oxygen is produced by cultural exchange in our professional relationships, then it brings motivation, it brings energy, it brings maybe fertility. So I would like to start with asking each of you shortly to describe one example of cultural exchange from your professional life that had a lot of oxygen, that was particularly enriching. Maybe you can describe that in a few sentences, one example of your work of cultural exchange that was in particular interesting for you. And why was that so? So since this is maybe a surprise question, so who would like to start first? because maybe you have to think about it a little bit. Maybe I can ask Ochai to start.
If you want, I can add no, Ochai, go forward.
Okay. Yeah. So I completely agree to the idea that collaboration and exchange is like an oxygen, because then it only not allows you breathe, but if you're moving, it's like gas, to fuel, to like adding gas, to the fire, that burns in you as an artist. And I would recall my traveling early this year to Burkina Faso, interestingly, because I've had other collaborations, like international collaborations with people in Europe and also US, but like going to Burkina Faso completely blew me. And it sparked the idea, for me to start seeing myself more as a cultural preservator, because then interestingly, like Burkina Faso is in West Africa, right? And it's supposed to be like, just a place near home. But going there and seeing the diverse cultures, it's not like I had this direct collaboration and exchange, but just talking with people, not an artistic creation per se, but just talking with people and observing the cultures, and also like having the conversations around our cultures, with the people, with the artists that I met in Burkina Faso, kind of blew me, completely, and just pushed me to dive into the oceans, of the African art. And it's amazing because, as an artist in Africa, the idea of, being even more inspired and getting more into your work is, when you travel to Europe and, you see European artists, which is also really good. But it's crazy how we do not think, that the culture just somewhere near home is something to really look into. It's something that is quite inspiring, because you go to a place where you see a lot of black people, and you think that these people are just like me, and you think there shouldn't be so much difference between me and these guys, and eventually you get blown away. So going to Burkina Faso earlier this year in February just kind of pushed me into like the African art more, because I saw like the practice of culture, in a different dimension. And it was surprising to me that this was happening in Africa, considering the fact that it's in West Africa. It was really it was something for me to really reflect on coming back home, and that has even inspired me to want to start up um, a project called the Mod Festival, which is going to push me to, start preserving our cultural heritage, because I think we've lost a lot of that here in Nigeria, especially in northern Nigeria. But seeing how much, people practice culture in Burkina Faso, pushed me to also look inward and see what we have in Nigeria, and also see how much, as an artist, I need to travel within the African continent and collaborate more with African artists, and also understand a lot about the African art itself. But if I didn't travel, to Burkina Faso, seen this, I would have never understood how much, you know, we
Thank
had.
you, Ochai.
Sorry,
Thank you for this
maybe I took
strong
time.
comment in the beginning. I think you touched a lot of on a lot of things that we can also talk in more depth a bit later, like the question of exchange not only between the North and the South, but also between African countries. That's definitely something we can come back to. I think Valeria also wanted to come with an example of cultural exchange.
Yeah, I can actually cite two very briefly. Well, the first is an exchange that happened between Italy and Tunisia, two countries that were particularly significant for me. And basically, it was a project in 2015 that I worked for. And included residencies between the two countries. And basically, it was the time in which I met a number of artists, among whom someone I still work with since then, and with whom I share the direction of an association in Tunisia that operates for bringing cultural content and projects in disadvantaged areas of the country. So this was a particularly valuable experience that then had some results over time. And then I can cite another one. Then we shift a little bit and we move towards the West Asia region. In Jeddah, where I directed an art residency that welcomed 36 artists this year. So it was a particularly inspiring experience, but of course, as an organizer, the more you give and you receive oxygen, also the more you drain yourself. So somehow, what is possibly also important is that, of course, artistic processes, exchanges, and projects of meeting are absolutely rewarding, but at the same time are extremely challenging, maybe extremely challenging. So it might be necessary as organizers also to choose what kind of scheme and what kind of approach in management we want to apply. Also not to, first of all, lose our passion and energy, and not to drain them, and then generate, of course, not positive outcomes. But at the same time, it is perhaps also important to start reflecting on what the models of management we want to employ, not to then have I don't know, models that do not correspond to the well-being at work or the well-being of people, because of course the key is always the people that animate projects and the people that participate in the projects. And people have to be good at different levels, by working, by being as beneficiaries and recontributing, so that this oxygen can also circulate in the best way.
Thank you so much, Valeria. Also, not only mentioning like results, for example, long-term relationships that can come out of such exchanges, but also already going deep into the challenges. And I'm very interested to speak more about what you mentioned about the models of management and also well-being in exchange, so that we are not only delivering professionally, but also that we create a space where people can breathe together well. So let's also look into that a bit more in the course of this panel. But let me first ask the other two, Marie or Madhu, if you would like to bring in another example that's taught you something else, probably. Thank you.
I can bring in two quick examples. So most of my work involves co-production and collaboration and practice with cultural producers on different parts of the African continent, but increasingly in West Africa. So two quick examples that I can give are in 2019, I, working with Bakwa, which is a Cameroon-based literary platform, helped curate and run a literary translation workshop. And this was really interesting for me because we got writers and translators from all over Cameroon. For those who don't know, Cameroon's a particularly complex space. They call it Africa in miniature. And one of the biggest things is the division between the Anglophone zones and the Francophone zones, because there were two different models of colonization that were in operation in Cameroon after World War I. Without going into all the details, what I found so interesting was how having a space where young Anglophones and young Francophones were exchanging created this great energy where they were learning from each other, and the importance of language and creative practice in breaking down these barriers, which don't have to do with people. They have to do with the government, and they have to do with separatist movements. It's not about the regular people, but it was thinking about the internal borders that we don't necessarily see. And for me as an academic, it was particularly generative and important to think about the kind of variegations and vitality, but also the separations and the kind of logistical, infrastructural, and structural differences within a single country. But what was wonderful was just seeing all of these participants. We had 13 of them coming together, and subsequently they've gone on to do incredible things. One of the participants, for instance, has now translated a novel by Emily Boom, and it's the first time that a novel by a Cameroonian writer published in France has been translated into English by a Cameroon-based translator, which has been very exciting. They subsequently have set up an association of Cameroonian literary translators. One of the participants has now set up Édition Nuance, a publishing house that is looking specifically for experimental women-driven Cameroonian stories, many of which are written in Cameroonian French. So it's thinking about the kinds of things that can happen when you just get people in a room together, despite the challenges that we faced with people moving across the country, some of whom coming from insecure zones. The second example I'd give is another partnership that I have, another co-production, collaboration, friendship, I would say, has been with Bibliothèque 1949, the library 1949, based in Yopougon, Quartier Populaire in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And again, quite recently, we spent a week where it was myself, two of our collaborators from Cameroon, another colleague from Britain. We all spent a week living together in the library, their residence spaces there, and just thinking about what living together, eating all our meals together, working on our laptops in the terrace in the morning together, what that could bring. And it's already brought about 3 or 4 different projects that have incredible momentum behind them and are very exciting, all based on Africa-centered exchange, language, creativity, translation, but also all of these things are based on friendship and kind of long-term partnership and work. And I think for that to happen, we do have to figure out ways to move beyond borders and really just spend a lot of time together and be together and think together. So yeah, those are just 2 examples from me.
Thank you so much, Madhu. Wonderful examples, not only about speaking about the borders that are separating internally, not only within countries, but maybe even within regions. I think this is also something that we can talk a bit more, maybe also with Ochai, what it means to work, or the whole festival we are speaking for today, like working from northern Nigeria and what that means in relationship to other Nigerian regions, for example, but also like talking beautifully about long-term relationships and even friendships. So how to look into that as a possibility to develop cultural exchange that is based on trust and that is based on being together, sharing a space, and not only delivering your stage performance. Yes, Marie, you are also with us today. Maybe from your experience as working in that field for so many years, what is there any example that you find particularly interesting?
I think I will, there would be many, but I will give one example, which is more related to some form of system also, like to support that type of artistic collaboration. And I think there was a mobility funding scheme within Africa that gave a lot of oxygen to artists and cultural professionals. So I am talking about it in the past. I do hope that they will be funded again. I'm talking about Art Move Africa, which is an independent mobility funding scheme that gave these opportunities for artists and cultural professionals to travel across borders. So it's exactly in relation with what Ochai was mentioning about providing this breathing space of connecting to your neighbor, to other contexts which are either within your region or within the African continent. So it's an independent mobility funding scheme. So it depends also like from foreign, usually European funding body. And in fact, as you all know, the African continent is particularly lacking that kind of support that can be provided directly to individuals. This is a kind of support that we miss in other continents, but particularly in the African continent. So I wanted also to highlight this, because we feel the need of having that kind of connection, collaboration, but also the lack of support, I would say, more in a consistent and long-term, talking about long-term collaboration. If you want to have that kind of sustainable, to take a trendy word, kind of collaboration, you need also that kind of support scheme for the people and by the people that know exactly what are their needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. To talk about mobility as one central item or necessity to bring people together, I would like to stay with this for a bit and ask the round again to reflect a bit more on the challenges. We were speaking now more about maybe the positive things and like new models maybe for exchange programs, like staying together for a longer time. But before we go back to that, let's speak a bit more about the challenges that you face when you do your exchange programs. So if we want to ensure productivity, long-term relationships, whatever beautiful results we are aiming at in such exchanges, what are our challenges? What makes it difficult? And what can we all maybe do better in our different positions, in our different networks? What could help us, but also how could we support the system? Like, what are your experiences here?
I can start with that. I think that there are a lot of challenges to mobility, and I think they're primarily infrastructural and maybe logistical is not the right word, legal perhaps. They have to do with different visa regimes. One thing I found, for example, is for me, as somebody based in the UK with both a British and American passport, it's quite easy to go places. It's rarely a struggle. It might be a mild inconvenience to get a visa, but I don't worry about it. But for people with different passports, it can be extremely difficult, not just to come to the north, but even to travel between different African countries. I think we can also think about the costs of movement. Again, you know, to go, say, from Eastern to Western Africa can cost more than going from the UK to either of those places. There aren't great flight connections. There aren't great trains. The roads are often not secure. So there are a lot of sort of issues that come with that. And I think, you know, in terms of what we can do for these sorts of things, I think the only thing we can really do is lobby and use whatever influence and power we have to talk to people in decision-making capacities about what we can do about this. I think we have to be creative and find workarounds quite often. I also think we have to be very upfront and honest with ourselves that there are asymmetries in terms of access and mobility. Not everybody is as mobile as everybody else. Not everybody has the potential to travel. And again, it's not just across borders. Sometimes it's within regions, you know. So for instance, I was hoping to actually be in Kaduna for the festival this time, but I can't because it is on the United Kingdom's Foreign Commonwealth Office's red list, which means I am not allowed to travel there for insurance purposes. And you think, well, that's absurd because I know that I'll be well taken care of if I were to go, but I can't go because my university won't insure me and my funders, who are the European Union, won't insure me. And, you know, it's for me a mild inconvenience, but then you think about artists who are based in these places, it's more than a mild inconvenience. It's actually a structural barrier to be able to move and travel. The other thing that I would say is I think we also need to think about colonial heritages and legacies and languages, because one of the biggest things that I found is how difficult it is to move from Anglophone countries of former British colonies to former French colonies. You think about, you know, something like Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria. It's very difficult to get between those two countries, despite the fact that they're essentially next to each other. But the way structures have been built have been, you know, Anglophone countries are connected to Anglophone countries, Francophone countries are connected connected to Francophone countries. And it's absurd because if you go beyond the colonial, if you go, to think about actual national cultures, there's so many more similarities than barriers. And yet we have these artificial systems that separate us, even though they shouldn't.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you so much. Ochai, would you like to comment on that as well? Maybe from your very specific place in northern Nigeria, which we are all longing to visit you. And
Yeah, I mean, like when she was speaking, I could completely relate because this has always been our challenges when we talk with Sada, and because we've had a lot of artists that we probably met maybe digitally or even in person in other countries, and the way we talk about our culture, the way we talk about Kaduna State, the region, it makes them want to come in and see what we do. It makes them want to come in and connect with the people in this region. But then, there's this system that has been put in place, where it's very difficult, to get in legally. Like you said, Professor Madu has a British and an American passport, but something as getting insured and also getting clearance from her funding bodies, was a challenge, that couldn't allow her to come down to Kaduna, which is really a beautiful space because yeah, a lot of things happen, and I try to always sensitize people. I remember one time Nadine connected me with someone from Germany that was supposed to come to Kaduna, and we spoke, and I was like, I gave her all of the details, everything that she needed to know. I said, come down to Kaduna. Kaduna is safe. All you need to do is just take a flight from Lagos and land in Kaduna. I can come pick you up from the airport. People are living fine, completely fine, in Kaduna State, in the city of Kaduna, and everything is okay. And I also remember we're supposed to travel to Burkina Faso, to Bobo Dioulasso. The At the time they had the coup, early this year, and we had issues because our funding bodies, the Institute for Say, made sure that we signed a release of liability form because they were not sure if the place was safe enough, for us. And for me, it was like, what is happening? What is the worst that could happen? I live in northern Nigeria. I've seen things, you know, it's an African country. What is the worst? Am I the target? I'm not really even the target. What is happening? And I said, let's go. Give me anything. And because I wanted to travel, I said, give me anything. I'm gonna sign it. I just want to go. And they gave us the form. We signed it. We went to Burkina Faso. People were living just fine. Interestingly, people were living just fine, and we were able to meet with artists. Nobody was talking about the coup, you know. And it's interesting, talking with Madhu, how also it's very difficult for artists to travel, between the African continent. It's something that was also quite very worrisome for me because it was costing us a lot more to travel from Nigeria to Burkina Faso, which is a West African country, and also like the idea of, communication, because I'm an English speaking person and then they are a French speaking nation. But I didn't even see that as a challenge. Okay. But it was also just the idea around it that was my challenge. I didn't see that as a challenge. Even as a movement artist, we made a lot of sign languages. If we needed to get food, if we needed to get direction, and it was fun at some point, to even just try to communicate with these people. And I think there's a systematic, thing that has been put in place to kind of separate us. Even the fact that we're this close, we're so far apart. And I think that it is easier for an artist to travel, from northern Nigeria to Europe than it is for an artist to travel from northern Nigeria to even the southern part of Nigeria, then even to other West African countries. I do not understand how this system works, but I think that also this sort of exchange that we're talking about now would break a lot of barriers politically and also systematically. There are a lot of things that have been put in place, and sometimes I do not really understand why things, are the way they are. But they just exist and they just try to make things difficult. And also like talking about mobility, funding bodies, I hope that more funding bodies can recognize the fact that we need, maybe grants and mobility support to be able to travel within the African continent and collaborate with more artists, and I think that that also will create like a sort of social political changes, because when they see the artists, when they see that the artists are connecting, they have no choice. And the way I see it as an African artist, we are the future as artists. In Africa, we are the ones that can unite Africa because we survive on collaboration. We breathe on collaboration. So it's very important, and I think that the system that have been put in place are actually to prevent this from happening. Politically, because they know that once we're together, Africa, will start to become a more better place and a more cohesive society or community. So like, I do not understand how this thing works, but I know that there are systems in place to prevent us from meeting and connecting with each other.
Thank you, Ochai. This very strong words. We breathe on cooperation. I think this is very strong and beautiful. And I think understanding the underlying system that we are all trying to work against or work with is definitely a challenge that we all share. And also, like, looking at the role of European-based organizations, I include the Goethe-Institut here, which has to go through a thorough change of its mission when looking at how to support culture. And I would like to ask Valeria and Marie, also based in Europe and working internationally, like, how do you react to these challenges? How can your organizations or institutions you are connected with also react to this need of travel mobility on the African continent? Are there possibilities, or are you bound to let's say South-North exchange programs? Because from my own practice at the Goethe-Institut, it's a constant negotiation between how do we organize our cultural support programs and without completely forgetting Germany and how do we react to that challenge? But maybe you have different experiences here or different ideas.
Maybe I can go first on this. So thanks a lot already to what Madhu and Ochai said. Yeah, on the related challenge, I don't have anything to add. I would like to add on what Madhu said about this importance of lobbying and advocacy. It's a constant fight. I think we see it for the African continent with very particular also questions which are related as well to internal questions related to countries. But we see it as well at the level of the Schengen space in Europe, for instance. I mean, there is still a lot of problem, a lot of issue with visa related to artists and cultural professionals coming from the global source or from non-Schengen country. And the case have been increasing, of course, since the end, I mean, the so-called end of the COVID. When I hear, I mean, what Madhu and Ochai say, I also think that we need to eventually combine more this form of advocacy action in relation with visa issue, for instance, and in relation as well to advocate, as what Ochai said, to more mobility funding scheme, but that are also adapted to the cost of mobility. It's not only the travel, and as we heard, the travel the cost is very important. Madhu says, and we often hear that sometimes it's cheaper to go to a European country than to travel within the African continent. So this is that kind of cost, the cost of staying, the cost of visa as well. We strongly believe as well, and maybe there is here the role of National Cultural Institute, particularly from the European Union. Maybe there is a role also to play here on this question of access to information for the sector, on this particular question, on funding opportunities, on visa issue as well. This is something that eventually we need also like to join forces. And I guess on the question on access to information, Valeria will have also like some word to say in relation with Culture Funding Watch, because this access to information and related training and mentoring, for instance, for the sector has also very much to be contextualized. So there may be some ways to do it in some context that may not work in other contexts. in terms of the tools that you use in order to share the information, the question of language, as Madhu was saying. So to wrap up a little bit what I say, the main message I would have that it's like to continue to join forces with different organizations, particularly on this question of visa issue, and also on joining forces on ways to make this information and related training to support the mobility of artists and cultural professionals more accessible and more contextualized. So that's why we need also this kind of multi-level type of partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Valeria, would you like to add some thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely, and thank you, Marie, for citing also this very, very major aspects that are there. And then, of course, access to information is one of the core aspects that may allow organizations, but also individuals, to continue doing experiences of exchange, and not only exchange, but experiences and projects for bringing African art turn around the continent, and not only, and go beyond. So this is why Culture Family Watch, as you were mentioning, publishes and disseminates information about opportunities for the art professionals and artists in Africa and in the West Asia region on an everyday basis. So it's a platform where opportunities for the sector are published daily. But then at the same time, and this is also connected to one of the challenges that we might encounter while doing projects and initiatives, is the fact that the challenge is keep things running and ensure sustainability. This can be done only if we start building on what will be next while we are doing something. And this can also be done if we have knowledge and capacities in resources mobilization and fundraising. And this is also why Culture Family Watch works on this, in building the capacity in the continent and in the MENA region, let's call it this way, for enabling the very actors, be they individuals or organizations, to achieve that sustainability and the sustainability approach. Then another core aspect is the sharing back of the information. Whenever we have done the experiences, whenever we operate in the sector, it is definitely important to generate ourselves the very information that may help us to lobby and to advocate and to ensure that somehow the very needs of the sector are heard and do not correspond to politics and policies and visions of other actors that may not be so aware of what the problems and issues and situation in our country is. And this is very tricky, because sometimes funding schemes are there, but they are not so beneficial, because actually they do not serve the real issues we have. And we are obliged, and as organizations, to bend towards objectives that are not ours. And to do that, we have also to be aware of how to present ourselves and how to turn things again towards our needs. And at the same time, we have to engage in this kind of conversation in which our needs are put forward. So lobbying is definitely important, but it is important also to generate knowledge, to have a strong base for lobbying and for putting forward advocacy purposes. So this is why, for example, another tool exists, and is the CCI Boost, is a platform where individuals and organizations working in the art and culture field can share what they do. So to generate knowledge, and then this knowledge is reshared back on the platform, so that researchers and operators can grasp this information and lead research and lead studies and lead analysis that may help also in a comparative from a comparative point of view, may also contribute to generate further knowledge that may, again, in this virtuous cycle, not vicious, but a virtuous cycle, feed advocacy.
Thank you, Valeria. And I also would like to invite our listeners to look at all these amazing platforms you are all working for that were just mentioned, because there might be also interesting knowledge and information there for you. So yeah, we've talked about borders now, we talked about challenges, and we talked about what makes our life and our work difficult. Also, like what you just said, like how we always have to squeeze our programs and our concepts and our ideas into the funding schemes, and thereby have to change them a lot often. And the bureaucracy of some funding institutions like the European Union, where you have to produce so much paperwork before you even get 1 cent. Just a recent experience I had to make. But yeah, I think we have some minutes left, and I would like to end with a more positive note, and going back to, I think, what Madhu was describing in the beginning about this beautiful example in Abidjan that you had recently made. And since our imagination is maybe not completely borderless or border free, but we can dream a bit. Maybe in the last minutes we can all think about what would be exchange program formats for the future. Madhu mentioned it was just wonderful to be in one space together, maybe a bit purpose-free, not connected to a concrete project, but living and working together. And by that, developing ideas just that come out of the moment. But maybe there are other formats, other ideas, other exchange methods you would like to share with us that you think would be good for the moment and good for the nearer future, or something that you had experienced and you would like to elaborate or build on, imagining we would have a world that makes that possible, or we would have a funding scheme that would make it possible. What would you bring to the table, or what would you like to share and offer?
I want to pick up on that word you used, purposeless, because I think that's actually the perfect word. So what I would like to see in my kind of perfect world would be more funding and support for purposeless activity. And I think it links to the previous discussion around sustainability. And I think, you know, there is an issue where so much mobility-based funding is very directive and project-based. And that leads to questions about kind of long-term stability, but also who's setting the agenda. I'm very fortunate right now that my funding is through a European Research Council starting grant. So it's 5 years and I direct the funds, which means we can be purposeless, but then that ends up being very purposeful. So I think maybe a little bit less, what I would like to see is a space where we can just meander together and be together and move together, and from that let creativity and intellectual production flourish.
Thank you so much, Madhu. Any other dreams or visions here that you would like to share? Or if maybe you contradict and you say, like, no, we have to work very seriously on concepts and agendas. That's also, of course, possible.
For me, I would also like to take us back to the whole idea of friendship, and also talking about what Madhu, just adding to what Madhu, was saying earlier about like being sharing a space and also just collaborating from that, brings us to even like the theme of the festival Sada is doing, which is like being and becoming. Like the concept of just being together, as artists and sharing space, has a lot of possibilities. And most times, we get funding, in Africa or in northern Nigeria or in Nigeria in general, that are like very much purposeful, like she said. And a lot of the times we have to bend our projects to fit into that, purpose, you know. And sometimes I ask myself this question, like, okay, why do European countries, why do they fund Africa? Why do they fund African artists? We are here, we see the problems, they can't even travel down here most of the times to see the actual challenges. No one has been to northern Nigeria to see what is happening in northern Nigeria when it comes to culture. You know, I applied for a fund recently, and it was for a festival because it was a festival that I'm doing, which is like targeted towards preserving the cultural heritage of northern Nigeria, because our cultures are going extinct. And I felt like, that project should have gotten the funding. I saw the list of the projects that got the funding. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to speak in a demeaning way about other projects, but like I felt like these needed like an urgent, kind of response. And I wondered, like, okay, was it that I didn't write well about what I wanted to do? Because it was quite clear that, the cultures in northern Nigeria are going extinct, and northern Nigeria is so vast, you know, and it's sometimes as an artist, like this is my challenge, when I think about how much, uh, you know, projects have to bend. I have to write it in a certain way. I have to bend into the purpose, for why you're funding. Who's really looking at the situations in Africa? Who's looking at, what is happening in northern Nigeria? I'm very thankful, to the Goethe-Institut that I'm having to come down to the south to share Compound, which is a project about, how we lived together in northern Nigeria, what it meant to us then, and how we coexisted. This is a pressing challenge because also this affects the general life of people in Nigeria in general. Like our election is next year. So I think that we need to start having the conversations around um, this thing. And it's very timely that we're having to be in the southern region who knows very little about the northern culture. So I think that I don't know, I really don't understand the politics behind, or the systems behind the funding bodies. As an artist, I just see, I look out for challenges, look at what I can do, look at how much I can contribute to helping out in our societies. And um, it's crazy sometimes when I think about why some things are happening, and also going back, just dragging us back to the whole issues with the visa. I'm sorry, I'm going back to it because I had an experience. Nadine is aware, and that kind of really broke me. And as an artist, it was very disturbing that I had to go through that. But yeah, I mean, these are like things that are happening, in general. And I think that if funding bodies, can maybe look into the societies, and fund them, in their context, in that context, it would make sense. It would make more sense to look at the context, in these regions, and then fund them according to that context, not necessarily like making them, because the fundings, are not so much. We don't have so much funding. So when you see a funding opportunity, you just jump in. You're like, oh, what do they need? Okay, this is what they need. So let me bend my project, and then everything. At the end of the day, you are not so objective with the project. So at
Mm,
the end of the day, you don't fund projects that are producing authentic works, authentic creations. You just,
mm.
people just bend things just to get the funding, because this is also how we survive.
Thank you. Thank you also for speaking so direct and honestly about it. I think this is whenever we fill in these applications and we have to imagine outputs and outcomes and all of this, we constantly think about where's this space to breathe in there, and how can we make it possible? Yes, maybe Marie and Valeria, some more dream spaces from you.
Yeah, I guess we have a big echo in between our different dreams on having also like some form of I will echo very much what was said before, like what Ochai was saying. This is a word also I wanted to use again, this question of contextualization and how the system or the funding bodies can take more this context into consideration. Maybe we are entering a phase of leaving behind this funding scheme when they exist, because in many contexts they don't exist, but this funding scheme that were a bit large and that were very much based on a form of offer, so where people had to frame their project into, meeting the criteria. So maybe we should go more into this system of providing a contextualized approach to the needs of the artist and cultural professionals. So of course it takes more time, of course it's more process-based, but this may have more impact in the longer term, because you just answer or try to answer the need of the artist and cultural professional. So this question of also adapted and accessible type of scheme. And I think it's also to echo also what Madhu was saying on this question on having space to be together. And I think this is also, so again, providing also this more process-based approach, not always with something that need to result in a project, in a concrete type of project, but not more of facilitating that space, this kind of space of exchange, which is so important. And we value it even more, I would say, after this phase of COVID, where we were not in the capacity to be together. And really also last point I wanted to add, and I think we are seeing a form of shift, or at least in a more European context, but also in relation with the African continent, also like with some Asian country, for instance, is also schemes or support that are related to you as an artist, a cultural professional, as a person, and not depending on your nationality, but more on where you are based and what is your context. So this seems also a kind of ideal type of scenario of accessibility, taking into consideration the question of context, and also like taking or supporting people for who they are, but not what they are representing in terms of nationalities, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Valeria, you have the last word.
Yes, I would be very, very, very brief. So also because my colleagues said a lot of important things, and I guess that they said almost all. So for forever, my dream will always be that in our world we will be more open to understand one another and each other, and this applies in the continent we work in, but also worldwide, and that somehow we remind at a global level that whatever is done is always done by people. So we should value more the people instead of Madhu was mentioning friendship, which is basically one of the engines and the pushes that actually push forward a lot of things, and perhaps is the major push. So hopefully more openness and understanding of each other, and at all levels, that might bring more opportunities and more art to everyone.
Thank you so much, Valeria. Thank you all. Looking at our ticking time, I would like to round up here with thanking all of you for making time for this exchange about exchange, which was very, very deep, I think. And we brought up very important aspects, such as working more context-based, working more process-based, all in relation to funding and mobility and exchange, but also looking at the purpose of what we do, and maybe sometimes working purposeless or purpose-free, but as Madhu said, having a lot of purpose doing that. And yeah, I think as Ochai said, we breathe on cooperation. This is a beautiful word, I think, and fits well to the festival theme of being and becoming. And I would love to say thank you, Sada, for bringing us here together this morning to talk about this, what is our daily life, our daily work, to produce cultural exchange, to support cultural exchange, to work with this exchange, and hopefully we can do that in the next few years. This was a digital panel. It was interesting that we didn't speak so much about that. It became maybe normal, more normal as we thought 1 year ago. I'm sure we would have spoken a lot about the digital a year ago, but now it is part of our work as well. So exchange digitally, but hopefully also physically more and more again. And I wish the Hausa International Book and Arts Festival only the best for this year and for the next years to come. Hopefully soon we will all meet in Kaduna. We will make sure that we come one day. And maybe
Yeah.
Ochai can then pick us up in a bus, so we will be safe, I'm
Yeah.
very sure.
Yeah, you all should come next year. We're having a performance festival, and we're gonna be like moving about and also experiencing cultural sites, and also seeing a lot of cultural activities. So please, between now and next year, if I can have you guys in Kaduna, I mean, it would be an experience, trust me, and you will see Kaduna State differently. I'm sure you will love it.
I think this is a good promise for next year. Let's all
Yeah,
try to come. Let's make it happen.
yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is Sarah gonna pop up? Oh,
I have no power about the recording.
okay. Sada,
Maybe it.
okay, I think it's getting ready to come in. Maybe I'm gonna call him. Hmm.